You're listening to Dental Student Vibes. How are we doing? How we been? Where we been? And how we doing? We've got some great episodes for you. We had the attorney Shane Kamkari from Kamkari Law. He's an experienced attorney for medical professionals. He's on today. We talked to him about a lot of different subjects. It's a lot of information, and it's all very high yield. Shane Kamkari, founder and managing attorney, received his BA in Government and Politics, International Relations from University of Maryland, College Park, and his law degree from Loyola Law School, Los Angeles. A practicing attorney since 1998, he's a member of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland, the Maryland Court of Appeals, and the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. Shane founded and established Kamkari Law in 2000. Shane has represented dentists and physicians in acquisition and mergers of dental practices and medical practices. He's given presentations and lectures at medical societies and associations, as well as the Maryland State Bar Association, regarding major legal issues involving selling and buying dental and medical practices. He's worked in various areas of medical practice law, from negotiating and drafting complex asset and stock purchase agreements, which we talk about today, startup of new dental or medical practices and offices, buy-ins and joining dental or medical groups as a partner, buying out and or dissolving professional companies and associations, drafting dentist and doctor associate employment contracts, drafting contracts for the sale, purchase, and lease of commercial property, and litigation of commercial disputes in and out of court. I tell you, this guy, he knows everything about law. He knows everything about buying and selling practices. So be sure to hit us up on Instagram at dental.student.vibes, on Facebook and on Twitter. Please leave a comment, ask some questions. He's going to give us a ton of information. So any questions you have, hit us up. Thanks for listening, guys. How are you today, Mr. Shane?
I'm good. I appreciate the kind words and sentiment. And if I can depart any information to your audience to help them with their professional endeavors, that would make me happy. And hopefully we can give them some information so when they are going into practice, they have some business knowledge and legal knowledge to help them get started.
Absolutely. That sounds wonderful. So, Shane, why don't we start off talking about some preliminary issues and also tell us about what are the different hats of the attorney?
I'll get started on that, but I would not be a self-respecting attorney if I did not give you guys a disclaimer. Just wanted to let you know that I am licensed to practice law in the state of Maryland as well as Washington, D.C. I am on inactive status in the state of California. That may soon change. But what I wanted to let you guys know is that there are certain laws, such as Stark law or anti-kickback statutes that are federal statutes, and no matter where you live or where you practice, the laws and the application would be the same. There are certain laws that are very state-specific, but by and large, the vast majority of the issues that we're going to discuss are going to be very similar, if not identical, in most states. But for your audience, in case they have a specific issue or they are looking into buying a dental practice or starting one up, they should consult with a local attorney just to make sure that the application of the laws are the same in their states. With that, the topic of discussion today, I guess what we're talking about are the major issues related to selling or buying a dental practice. And your attorney would be wearing a different hat representing you in those types of matters. And one of them is obviously you need to have a skilled negotiator, because the first thing that everybody wants to discuss and negotiate is the purchase price. So it helps to have a attorney that is skilled in negotiations and help you with negotiating the purchase price. It does happen sometimes that clients come to us, they have already spoken to an agent or a broker, and they have discussed the purchase price, and our hands are kind of tied. Obviously, those negotiations are usually not binding, but once you set the expectation that you're going to buy that practice for a certain price, it's very difficult for me to come in as an attorney and try to hit them below that price. So keep that in mind, and if you are going to retain counsel and hire an attorney to handle the transaction for you, you might as well get in touch with them from the very beginning, so you get all of the benefits of retaining counsel.
Right. So if we happen to hire a broker, get the attorney at the same time.
Well, you would hire a broker if you are the seller because you want to list it. Usually the buyers don't hire an agent or broker, they go to an agent or broker. But yeah, if you are a seller, you're basically going to enter into a contract with that agent as well, with the broker. So you might as well speak with an attorney so you know what you're signing as far as the listing, because the agents and brokers are in business for themselves, and they may give you a contract that is not necessarily in your best interest, but it's in their best interest. Right. So if you're a seller, I would certainly recommend that you retain counsel before even approaching an agent to list your practice for sale. And if you're a buyer, you certainly should contact the attorney, because now if you're dealing with a broker, that broker is the agent of a seller, and you should have somebody that has the requisite know-how and information and the skills to deal with them from the get-go. Okay. So being a business negotiator is one of the hats that your attorney is going to be wearing. They should be a good commercial transaction attorney, in that they have dealt with a lot of business transactions, buying and selling of businesses. But if I were you, I would go and find an attorney that is highly experienced in buying and selling of dental and medical practices, because there are aspects, some of them are practical and some of them are legal, that a regular commercial transactions attorney would not know about. We will probably touch on some of those issues. And most of them don't have any ideas about the healthcare laws. A couple of them I mentioned at the outset, like Stark Law, anti-kickback statute, and they wouldn't even know what to look into when it comes to conducting due diligence with regard to those healthcare issues and healthcare laws.
Right. So let me ask you a question. What is the best way to find an attorney who's experienced in dental practice acquisitions or mergers, or in comparison to, just the commercial transactions attorney or the healthcare attorneys?
Well, I would say it's about the same if you're looking for an attorney for anything else. So you would do your research, obviously, with the advent of internet some 20 years ago, things are much easier and you can do your research online, but you want to make sure and ask the right questions. How experienced are they, not just in regular commercial transaction matters, but healthcare transaction matters, specifically buying and selling of dental or medical practices. And because there are also another hat that your attorney is going to wear is they should have a good knowledge of the tax laws, because, for example, when you negotiate the purchase price, that's just the beginning.
Right.
Later on, you have to negotiate the allocation of the purchase price, because that could have significant tax consequences. And if the attorney is not well versed regarding tax laws and tax issues, then you may not even go to closing. And by the time where you have to file your taxes, you're going to find out that you have a tax liability bigger than it should be, or you had no idea. So those are the things that I would look for when I am searching an attorney to help me with purchasing or selling a dental practice.
Awesome. That's good stuff to know.
So moving on to buying and selling. So tell me a little bit about the benefits for the sellers.
Well, some of them are rather self-evident. Usually, who looks to sell their practices? Usually it's somebody that doesn't want to practice anymore. And that usually is a dentist that is looking to retire, and they want to cash in on the value of the practice that they've set up for years or maybe even decades. And since they're going out of practice and they want to retire, they may be selling their practice. There are instances where a dentist spreads himself or herself too thin, and they go out and buy multiple practices, and then down the road, a few years down the road, they find it really difficult to manage all of those practices at the same time, especially if they do not have a partner, if they do not have a good manager. And then that could cause some attrition in the multiple locations. They may lose patients, their revenues may go down. So because of that, they may want to consolidate their practices, and if they have 5 of them, they may want to cut down to 4 or 3. So those are the examples of the dentists that may be looking to sell their practice. Right. On the other side of it, you have newly graduated dentists that are looking to start their own practice, and I find dentists to be the most entrepreneurial of the bunch among the medical practitioners. So they may be looking to start up a new practice, or they may decide that instead of building a practice up from scratch, they want to pay the premium in form of a purchase price and buy practice. So when they start going to office from day one, they have patients to see and they have revenues coming in, and it's a profitable business for them.
Right.
Aside from the practice.
So when you're starting a new practice, at what point would you actually need to hire the attorney? Would you start when you're looking for the practice, or is it already, when you're in the negotiations? Would an attorney be able to help you find the practice? Is that the correct pathway to go down?
Absolutely. I think that would be the best way to go, in fact. From the moment that you decide, not when you're contemplating, when you're not, you're 80% sure but not 100% sure, but the moment that you're 100% sure and you're ready to hit the road to start looking for practices to buy, I would say that's a good time to contact the attorney, because like I said, you can look at the listing, contact the broker, start talking about it. I've seen cases where the broker tells the dentist that, well, if you like that practice, why don't you write us a check for deposit for, I don't know, really a small amount, maybe $2,500, $3,000, $1,500. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that without having the proper documentation, they are taking that deposit, but they're not giving you any assurances in return. So they can take your $3,000 and then sell the practice to somebody else tomorrow. So you do not want to make a deposit, and you wouldn't know that because they talk you into it. The amount is not really that large. And if you don't have the sophistication or the know-how, you may just write a check thinking that you're securing that practice for yourself when it's not the case. So from the moment that I would say you're going to start looking at listings and pick a practice to purchase, would be a good time to contact the attorney for the buyer.
Okay, so the attorney would definitely be willing to write up the contract, especially for that first deposit that you were talking about.
Well, yes, what happens is that the first legal documentation is a letter of intent that that we send to either to the seller or to the agent. If they have an agent, it usually goes to the agent or the broker. And that letter of intent, some people, I want to put this out, because some people think that just because it's called a letter of intent, by definition, it is non-binding. And you can make any kind of promises you want and then walk away from it, thinking that it's a non-binding letter of intent. But unless the letter of intent specifically states so, that these terms are non-binding, that could be as good as any contract, and they can hold you to it.
Okay.
So, but my letters of intent usually have different sections. One part is a non-binding part that says we're interested in purchasing the practice, perhaps for this amount, and those portions are non-binding. There are portions that I would like to make binding, and those are the non-disclosure agreement, confidentiality, and the no-shop provision that I was mentioning to you, that when you leave a deposit, you want to say that it is binding on you that you are not going to shop this practice and sell it to somebody else,
okay,
because I'm leaving you a deposit.
Right.
So you see how different it could be than an average person just writing a letter and sending a check in, thinking that either this is non-binding, or without stating so, thinking that they are going to stop shopping the practice and not sell it to anybody else.
Okay, is that kind of similar to like a first right of refusal when purchasing real estate or something like that?
Well, the first right of refusal gives you an option in the future,
right,
that, for example, you go lease a place and say, I will have the option to purchase this in 5 years. So the no shop is a little bit stronger than that, in that you're really stating that you're interested in purchasing it at this amount, but you need to do some checking up. You need to kick the tires, so to speak, and check a few things and do due diligence to make sure that there are no legal issues with the practice that you're buying, but you're interested in buying it. But while you're spending all this money doing research, hiring an attorney, kicking the tires, looking into doing due diligence, which all of it is going to cost you money, that you're not at the mercy of the seller, and the seller is going to stop shopping the practice, so all the money that you're spending doesn't go to waste.
Okay, so it essentially protects both parties as well.
Well, yes, that's the idea. So there is a common understanding about what's going on, and what do you expect the purchase price to be. Sometimes it's difficult because you offer a purchase price, but it's contingent upon certain conditions, and one of those conditions might be that, it's always that, actually, that there are no judgments or liens against the practice. And then if I find that somebody has a judgment against it for $40,000, I want to reduce that purchase price by $40,000, or sure that judgment is going to be satisfied by the time we go to closing, and it's going to become my practice.
Okay, so what if the judgment isn't closed yet? What would happen in that situation?
Well, what happens is that we signed a letter of intent, and if it's signed by both parties, everybody knows where they stand, and then we start. The clock starts running on doing due diligence, and due diligence could be in a form of in buying dental practices. It could be commercial due diligence. And that means that we ask for all of the corporate records to make sure that the company is in good standing, the bylaws are proper, look at the minutes and resolutions of the board of directors, and see what is the history of this company and what happened. We check for liens. If somebody has a lien against the equipment, they are supposed to file a lien. We call that a UCC lien.
Okay.
And we check for that. And if it's a judgment by definition would also be a lien, because it's automatic. If there's a judgment entered against somebody, whenever they want to sell real estate or whatever else they want to do, they have to satisfy those judgments, because we do a check for it. And once we find the judgment or the lien, the UCC lien, then the buyer is going to demand that those liens be satisfied and paid off before they take over.
Okay. Talk a little bit about whether your licenses have disciplinary actions against them for
Well,
the buyer or the seller.
right. Well, if you're the buyer, the seller doesn't really care. If you're the seller, the seller doesn't care if the buyer has a bad history. I mean, sometimes they do. Sometimes it is not just business. It's been a dentist that has been in practice for 30 years, intimately knows their patients, and they want to know that when they sell the practice, their employees are going to be in good hands, and they're just not going to get fired. And their patients are also going to be in good hands, and they are cared for by a dentist that is taking over that would give them the same level of service and expertise in what they do. But sometimes nowadays, unfortunately, everything is just about business and money, and most times the sellers don't really care what the history of disciplinary action is on the buyer. But if there's a role reversal and the shoe is on the other foot, the buyer does care about what the seller has been doing, because a big part of the purchase price that you're paying is for the goodwill of the practice. You're not really paying what the equipment is worth. That's actually probably maybe 25% of the purchase price. The other 75%, you really go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good number to remember. 25% being the equipment for the purchase price.
That's interesting, because that's a larger margin than I'd expect as well. And this is something that I wouldn't have even considered, when you look into purchasing and practice, is something that you have to be mindful of something like this.
Right, and it also goes back to the tax issues, because that makes a huge significance about which portion of the purchase price is allocated to the goodwill of practice and what percentage is allocated to the actual assets.
Wow, that's very interesting. I said that's very interesting. I've never heard of that. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah,
that's why he's here.
I'm glad.
That's why you're talking to me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the employment contracts when you're going to be taking over a new practice? What happens to those employment contracts? I would assume it's usually pretty common to keep everybody on who's already an employee, but is it a good idea to clean house? What would be the best idea, and how does that work?
Excellent question. Actually, as a buyer, when you go in, you don't want the patients to come in and not know that the practice has been purchased and somebody else is going to be attending to them. And they walk into the office, the location is the same, but all the faces are different, from the receptionist to the hygienist. And then they go sit on the chair, and then the dentist is different and asks them to open their mouth and go to work on them.
Right.
It's not a comfortable situation. So from the buyer's perspective, you like continuity. You like the same faces. You like the patients that were not your patients just yesterday or a month ago. When they come into to your office, everything is about the same except you. And that actually takes us to so when you're talking about employment contracts, you have the non-dentist, if you will, in the office, and you have the receptionist, the hygienist, and everybody else. And most times they don't really have a contract. People just start working and their pay is clear and everything else.
Right.
But if there are employment contracts, you want to review those, and if they're okay, you adopt those. But when it comes to the selling dentist, you want to also keep them around, because, like I said, just somewhere about 70-80% of the purchase price that you're paying is for goodwill, and you want to take advantage of that. And what we do is we ask the selling dentist to stick around for anywhere between, I've had it as short as 1 month, but that's not really ideal. Ideal would be somewhere about 5-6 months, but it could be 4 months. Sometimes It could be a year. It depends on the selling dentist. Usually they're selling because they don't want to be there anymore, so it's hard to keep them.
Right.
But on the other hand, as a buyer, you like to keep them around. So when the patients come in, they see the same dentist, and then that dentist introduces you to the patient, and now you're not complete strangers. Everything is a lot smoother. The patient feels comfortable. You're not going to lose a lot of patients, and it would be a shame to pay a purchase price and go to practice after the closing day by yourself without the selling dentist, only for the patients to come in and say, I was really coming for that other guy, and this new dentist is no different than the dentist right next to my house. Why should I have such a long commute to come to a new dentist that I don't know? But it smoothens the transition if the selling dentist sticks around for a transition period that we discussed. It could be 4 months. It could be 12 months. Okay. Sometimes they like to stay around and make a little income because they get paid during the transition period.
Right.
And sometimes they really need to get the heck out of Dodge as soon as possible, and it's hard to keep them around.
Right. So let's talk about a little bit more about the selling dentist, what the selling dentist needs to get done, and what I guess as us new upcoming students, new graduates, what we need to do and have the selling dentist do for his patients. For example, I know that a lot of selling dentists will send out a letter to all the patients about the incoming dentist. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, smart guys there. Yes. So yes, we do send out letters, and that's like the first foremost step of introduction, so the patients have a heads up, and then we put in there that the selling dentist is going to stick around for a few months, and so come by, get an introduction, and that's the first step. Then they come in, they get formally introduced by the selling dentist to the buying dentist, to the buyer, and that is supposed to smoothen the transition, and it does. I would tell you that if a seller told one of my buying clients that he can't stick around after the closing, I'm going to say the purchase price needs to be drastically discounted. I mean, the goodwill is part of all of this stuff. I'm paying a goodwill for you establishing a good relationship with patients that are gonna want to come back here. That's why I'm buying this practice. Right. Otherwise, I just go lease office space, buy brand new equipment instead of your used equipment, and start my own practice that way. And so the reason why I'm buying your practice is because I want to have business, I want to have patients coming in, I want to have gross revenues, and I do not want to lose those patients.
Right.
So if you're going to take off after the closing and you're not going to be around to introduce me, that goodwill needs to be discounted substantially.
Can you give me a number for that? How much would you say that discount would be?
I mean, it's really subject to negotiation, but I would say, and it depends on the purchase price. I would say a good 25-30%.
Really? So that really is a big deal to get that done.
It is a huge deal. It is becoming a lesser issue because more and more dentists are taking patients from insurance companies, and those patients, they really go to a network, they go online, they check the list of dentists, and they're really picking one dentist against the other one on a list. So it doesn't make that much of a difference. But if it's a out-of-pocket patient, it's a patient that has been coming to that practice for a long, long time, they care. And if there is no formal introduction and there is not a transition period, they may very well go to another dentist as opposed to you.
All right. Well, as we're getting close to time here, thank you, Shane. Thanks for talking to us, and listen to us on the next episode. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Wow. That was some great high-yield information from Shane. That really opened my eyes to a lot of things. I hope it did for you guys, too. We want to thank you for listening. This is part 1 of our interview with Shane. In the next part, we're talking about acquiring property and some things you may not have considered We also talk about associateship contracts. We also ask them about the timeline of when to hire. And we go into some other topics such as asset and stock purchases in the practice. So these are some things you would never even consider. So thanks for listening, guys, and stay tuned for part 2. Make sure to hit us up on Instagram at dental.student.vibes. Any questions, comments, anything, we'd love to hear from you guys. Again, thanks for listening.